Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Homebrew Workshop. In this video, we're going to take a look at Smith's tools, what we know about them for D&D 5th edition, and how to make them a little bit more interesting to highlight them as a unique trait for your character. So, without any further ado, let's look at Smith's tools. So what exactly do we know about Smith's tools so far? We know that they weigh 8 pounds, they cost 20 gold pieces, and they allow you to add your proficiency bonus whenever your DM would allow it. Now, what do we do to make them more interesting? Now, I would propose that we look at this in terms of 2 specific objectives. The first objective is, how do we use Smith's tools as a trade for money? How does the average Smith within a fantasy world use these tools to earn a living? Then, by extension, the player can leverage this system to earn money during downtime however they would like. At the same time, for objective 2, how do we highlight active production and highlight these tools as special interests? If you design your character to be a smith and you really want to lean into that aspect of them, as opposed to just, I guess I have proficiency with smith's tools, then how do we highlight that you're a smith? And how do we do that to make you, kind of give you an outlet to make it more interesting? So, what I've determined for objective 1 kind of ties into objective 2, but we'll get there. Smith's tools can be used to craft or augment a number of different weapons, armor, or tools. Simple base stuff. Basically, as a smith, you can choose to create an existing mundane item that's already within the DM's guide by basically just providing the materials for the project and spending a certain amount of time with it. Your DM may rule that it'll take, anywhere from 1 to 2 hours of crafting time to be able to make something like a simple short sword or a dagger or something else. And maybe it'll take longer to make something a little bit more complex like full plate mail armor or anything else. But these as mundane non-magical items should be something that you as a smith are able to create. These items do have to be something that would be created in a smithy. So you aren't going to make tanned leather armor, which you are probably going to be able to make chainmail armor, or kind of that full plate mail armor, or a half plate, or a breastplate, a dagger, a sword, anything else like that. That would be something a smith would be able to create in a forge, something more metallic in nature. Padded armor or anything else like that is not necessarily something that applies here. Now, how else do we highlight this to kind of address more active production for goal area 2, which, like I said, still kind of comes into goal area 1 for the objective 1 of how do you make this a trade. So once you have these items, you sell them. Obviously, a smith creates a bunch of swords, ultimately doesn't need all of them, can sell them to wayward adventurers. Okay, that's neat. You'll run into plenty of smiths in your time playing the game. But you can also produce items that are not traditionally available as a pre-created item within the DM's guide or within the player's guide. To proceed with this, you can make 2 specific choices: size and complexity. And you'll definitely have to work with your DM on this, because if you have a weird out-of-the-box idea like a Swiss Army knife greatsword, you're probably going to have to hurdle some bigger checks, but your DM will be able to guide you as the person that is running the game and helping you design these things. This is a system that you can use as a baseline to develop these kinds of items. So, let's take a look at the size chart and the complexity chart here. The size chart has some of the basic sizes: tiny, small, medium, large, huge, and gargantuan. This does follow the typical size within expected kind of settings for D&D. tiny is something that might be handheld. Small is something that's, you know, relatively the size of maybe a goblin or a halfling. Medium is a person. It's a 5x5 square. It's the area that a person will take up. Large is larger, and huge and gargantuan are absolutely massive creations. So you aren't necessarily going to make a gargantuan level greatsword that's something that can be wielded, but you can absolutely make it as an art piece for sale. That's something that's completely available and completely, you know, expected for something that you can do. Now, creating something that large, of course, is going to be somewhat of a challenge, but that is where the DC modifiers come in. Now, this process, looking at the tables, once you pick a size, you have the ability to see how much time it will take you. A tiny object, you can roughly hammer out in, you know, maybe 1d4 hours. Simple enough. It could take you anywhere from, you know, 1 hour, depending on what it is, to 4. Okay, that's nice. But then as you get more and more, you know, complex or more and more large in terms of these things, like if you were to make that gargantuan greatsword, you're probably looking at anywhere between 10 hours and 40 hours. Like, this could be an entire work week of a process for you. And so knowing that, you kind of have the ability to say, all right, what do I want to do for sure? You know, how am I going to make this work? From there, we'll talk about the DC modifier associated with that in a moment. But from there, you pick the kind of complexity. There is poor, simple, average, moderate, fair, and high. Now, complexity is how complex it's going to be to create this, but it ends up in the final project, once it's actually completed, reflecting the quality level. So it is complexity / quality within the table. It has a gold piece modifier and a DC modifier. Once you have your size and you know how long it's going to take, what you can do is say, I want to make a average quality item or a simple item or a high quality item. It just depends. And those kinds of things will augment not just the gold piece value, but also the DC of what it's going to take to create it. So once you have that size and complexity picked out, you know how long it's going to take you, and now you can see how much you might be able to get for it once it's all the way done. So if you were to choose a absolutely gargantuan item, right? What you do is you take the size modifier, or the size of the item, which is relatively equivalent to the basic time. So a tiny item is a size modifier of 1, and a small is a size modifier of 2, medium is 4, large is 6, huge is 8, and gargantuan is 10. What you end up doing from there is saying, all right, if I'm going to have a gargantuan item that is of a high quality, I get to roll 6d12 times my size modifier. So that's 6d12 times 10. That way, that piece, if you are successfully able to create it, is a massive item that has quite a bit of material in it, which means that it's at the very least worth its material for the most part, but also that it is of a very high quality. Like, this is I'm going to create the sword that is the landmark that they have as like the center of an area courtyard. I'm designing a highly filigreed sword that sits at the center of a fountain, like it's the sword in the stone thing. It's there, everyone looks at it, the city pays me for it here. That's what I've done. And you can get paid a lot because that is an amazing piece, and that is something that you and your party will be able to look back on as an actual landmark within the game at that point. That's pretty cool, but it gets you more money. And that's kind of where active production and this kind of objective 1 and objective 2 meet, is you can earn money this way as a trade, and you can actively produce things as a smith this way to make yourself a weapon or to just earn funds should you need to. Now here's the really rough part. That's amazing. We've talked about everything that we can do here. And now we got to look at our limits, which is always the most fun part, right? But when you're looking at being able to create something that is of a gargantuan size and a high quality, it's going to be harder to create than something that's a little bit more manageable. So it's effectively going to be a mastercraft item at that point. The DC that you need to be able to make is going to be higher. What you end up doing is you undergo a forging process. You choose the size, level of complexity, you know how much time it's going to take. This process is performed over the course of that window of time with 3 specific checks at regular intervals throughout that work process. This process can be used as well to repair or augment an item, but we'll get there. Once the project has kind of been established with you and your DM, take the DC associated with your size and complexity and add that in. Your 3 smithing checks that you will make at these required kind of regular intervals may use your strength, intelligence, or wisdom modifier. So just a straight D20 plus your wisdom, intelligence, or strength. And then your DM kind of calls for one of those, plus your proficiency or expertise if you have it with smithing tools. Each check can use those kinds of skills, but it's really not an athletics or a acrobatics or a nature. It's just the base ability. From there, the DC of each of these checks is 8 plus the size modifier plus the complexity modifier. So if you were going to be making that gargantuan high quality greatsword, what you're looking at is 8 plus 10 for the fact that it's a gargantuan item. So that is an automatic 18 DC, plus it's a high quality, so the DC modifier is 5 on top of that. So that's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So you have to beat a 23 for those checks. Now, to successfully create this item, you need to succeed on 2 out of those 3 checks. If you roll a natural 20, it counts as 2 successes. If you roll a natural 1, it counts as 2 failures, that kind of a thing. But if you're able to succeed on 2 out of these 3 checks, you successfully create this item at the expected gold piece value. So whatever you had rolled for your 6d12, kind of times your size modifier. So 6d12 times 10, right? That can be a lot of money. But ultimately, if you do not have the successful checks, it comes out at either a lower quality or it doesn't come out at all, right? That's kind of the risk. It either comes out at a lower quality, depending on what you roll and up to your DM, or it is at half of the expected value automatically. That makes it so that it's really difficult to make these things, but you at least probably make something. Because the fact of the matter is, when you're a smith and you're working with metal, to some extent, there's a chance that you can harvest what you've created and try again. That kind of thing is, I'm going to melt down this piece, take the metal back, and try to start over. Now, at that point, all you've really lost is the time. So if it is imperfect or other things that your DM rules based on the attempt, you can choose to forfeit that time and move on and start over and try to do another project. That's fine. But, you can also attempt to sell it even still, because the fact of the matter is somebody else might start to do that process as well. Now, the other thing to make it more interesting to be a smith, because being a smith here requires you to be around a forge, which you are not going to be able or capable, for the most part, of carrying a full smithing forge with you on the road. As you go through an adventure or into a dungeon or on a ship or on a skyship or anything else, how likely is it that you're going to have a full metal foundry or forge available to you? Relatively unlikely. So how do we highlight smith's tools outside of just this base creation? To fulfill the objective 2 a little bit better, what I've designed is not only can you during that kind of downtime in a specific city or at a forge create an item, but you can augment it. So if you're going to create, repair, or augment an item using kind of the same system here, you can adjust some specific things. Potentially, if you're like, I really need to give my sword a silvered edge, the DM will tell you how much silver it will take and how much it will actually take to make that happen. And then there's a potential for you to just actually make it and have it. Now that still requires you to be on the in the forge there, but while you're on the road or in a dungeon or anything else kind of like that, if you were to find a totally beaten up sword or something else that is there, the DM can tell you what the complexity is and what the size is, and you can attempt to undergo this same forging process to repair it. Now, granted that this also requires a forge, but at the very least, while you're out and about, you can find things, recognize them, and see how you can repair them. So if you find an ancient sword from a ruin, it might be more interesting to pick it up and try to find the pieces and reforge it yourself. That way it's a little bit more valuable and something that if you were to take it to a shop isn't just I made a sword, it's I made and reforged an ancient sword from this civilization or from this ruin. That kind of thing is awesome. Now, when you find things in the dungeon, there's the potential for it to be like a magic sword or anything else like that. At that point, the DM, you might just have to find some way to account for that in the complexity. If it's a magic item, maybe it is of an inherently high quality the minute that it's magical. And on top of that, you may have a DC modifier that ties into the fact that it is magic. If you have magic items like this, the higher the enchantment quality or the higher the rarity of that item, the potentially more difficult that it is to reforge it. So maybe if you have a common magic item, okay, cool, I'm not going to add an additional magic DC to it. But the minute that you get to uncommon or rare or anything else, and God forbid legendary, maybe the DC modifier immediately goes up, just for the fact that it's magic in and of itself. The complexity automatically being high will add a +5 to that DC. And for it being a legendary magic item or a uncommon magic item, maybe if it's legendary, it's another +5, which automatically makes it a +10 on top of the size modifier. So you have the size modifier, the quality modifier of high, plus your additional magic modifier that you as the DM choose as the person that knows exactly what this enchantment does, and the players may not. That's something that you know, but like I said, since the players don't have any idea, they can't really have any insight on what it is unless they were to identify or anything else, in which case it may be more helpful to highlight just how rare this item is and just how challenging it may be. And from there, if they find the proper materials or anything else like that, like if you need to have a specific metal like adamantine or something else, then you take the material's kind of additional magic modifier down or off completely because they have the same relatively enchanted item to be able to create or repair this item here. That makes it so that while they're out and about, they can still roleplay being a smith. And you as a player can take, if you, and then going off of a stereotypical dwarven smith, walk into a dungeon and see all of these guards and go, what kind of weaponry were they carrying? Oh, they all had a bunch of long swords. How beat up are they? What kind of history do I get from this? Which ties into the other aspect of Goal Area 2. What I'm proposing here is that on top of being able to add your proficiency bonus or your expertise, if you're an expert with smith's tools or just proficient with them, whatever it is, give your player advantage on recalling history or lore or other things like that, specifically for looking at smith's items, like a sword or armor or other items there. The idea being there's some history attached to the creation and refinement of items from when smiths first started doing their work to now. There is some context in some story or history that is inherently passed down, knowingly or unknown, that they may or may not have shaped the process of smithing over time. Maybe the very specific reason that something gets done during a smithing process is because they learned that this isn't effective because of, one thing or another. Maybe the 1,000-folded katana is extremely fragile, and that's something that people have learned over the course of the process. It's very good cutting one direction but not the other, and so finding a broken sword, you can say, wow, this must have been forged in this kind of a way because it resembles the way that this kind of sword would have broken if it was a katana. I wonder if I could recreate this. And then you can look at that and have it be a different method. Or there's the potential for the same issue that we have with like Damascus steel, where we're not 100% sure the exact process of creating Damascus steel. But that's something that as a smith, you have the potential to learn or re-uncover or find pieces and parts of the things that may lead you to be able to figure out how to make that kind of a metal alloy. So the other option there is, like I said, give them advantage, let them add their proficiency bonus for those kinds of things to recall lore or history. Maybe they have kind of the expertise within that field to know those things. Otherwise, that's kind of it for the Smith's Tools. It allows you to roleplay being a smith, being someone that is inherently interested and makes their living doing these things. But outside of everything else, thank you all for watching the video. I appreciate kind of taking a second because it's hard to figure out how to make Smith's Tools interesting for D&D. Smiths are the I need to go get a new sword, so I'm going to stop at the smith or at the shopkeep and I'm going to buy one. And there isn't that much usually in terms of an actual smithing process for gameplay. So should you like, there's now a system to some extent. Work with your DM as always, because that way they can help guide the adventure that you are all having and undertaking together. So, like I said, thank you all for watching. Be good to one another, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!